My name is Clara, and I was 29 years old when the best day of my life became the worst. 2 hours after giving birth, still weak and overwhelmed with love for my new daughter, my husband leaned in and destroyed everything with a single, whispered sentence. The worst betrayal of my life didn't come from a stranger, it came from my husband, whispered in my ear just 2 hours after I gave birth to our daughter. He looked at our perfect, tiny baby, and with ice in his voice he said, "I already have a son with another woman. I'm not putting my name on this baby." The shock was so profound, so absolute. I didn't even cry. I didn't scream. I just looked down at my daughter's face, this tiny, perfect person who had no idea that her own father had just disowned her in the same breath he'd refused to even hold her. I pulled her closer to my chest, and a strange, cold smile spread across my face. "Then remember this moment," I whispered back, "because it's the last one you'll ever get with us." He actually had the audacity to laugh. A short, dismissive sound, like I was just a hysterical new mother who'd eventually come to her senses. He had no clue that by morning we'd be gone, and that his life, his fortune, and his entire future were about to unravel. My name is Clara, and this is the story of how my husband, Julian Vance, tried to throw his family away and ended up losing everything. 4 years earlier, Julian walked into my life like a dream. My life before him was, well, it was normal. I had a solid job as a contracts auditor, the kind where the coffee gets cold before you even notice. He was the heir to Vance Holdings, a real estate empire his grandfather built from the ground up. He had this quiet confidence. He never had to raise his voice or show off. He just was. For the first year, I really thought I'd found a unicorn, a man with immense wealth who was still fundamentally kind. His mother, Eleanor, was polite in that way people are when they're just waiting for you to leave the room. His father, Arthur, barely acknowledged my existence. I told myself it was just old money, old ways. I didn't understand yet that in the Vance family, silence was a weapon. We got married in a small courthouse ceremony. Julian insisted on it, saying he wanted to keep it away from all the company noise. I remember his hands were shaking as I fixed his tie. I thought, a man this nervous to marry me must really love me. He couldn't possibly be capable of the kind of calculated cruelty I'd meet in that hospital room. I was so wrong. It was in our 2nd year of marriage that I first heard the name Serena. She was Julian's executive assistant. I met her a couple of times at company events. The second time, at a holiday party, I saw her watching Julian from across the room. Her expression wasn't just longing, it was exhausted. I shook it off. I had no real reason to suspect anything. But the small things had already started. The calls he'd taken in the driveway. The business trips that kept getting extended by a day. Then, too, with vague excuses. One night, he came home late from a supposed client dinner. The next morning, I found a receipt in his coat from a restaurant 2 towns over. When I asked him about it, he spun this whole story about a surprise retirement party he joined late. Even then, a little voice in my head whispered, "A man telling the truth doesn't need that many details." That same holiday, just before Julian came over, I ended up standing next to Serena at the drink table. She asked how our nursery planning was going. It was such an ordinary question, but the way she asked it, so carefully, like she was afraid of the answer, it was strange. She excused herself before I could even finish my sentence. I just figured she was nervous talking to the boss's wife. I had no idea. Then, one weekend while Julian was away on another business trip, his mother Eleanor showed up at our house unannounced. She said she was looking for some old files of his. She was walking through the house, barely looking at me, and she made this strange, cold comment about how the Vance legacy depended on a strong, male heir to carry the name forward. It felt so pointed, so out of place. At the time, I just chalked it up to her being her usual frosty self. Looking back, it was a warning. The entire family was already in on a secret I hadn't even begun to uncover. And all this was happening while we were struggling with fertility. For 2 years, we were in and out of clinics. Julian came to every appointment in that first year. He held my hand. He told me it would happen. Looking back, I have to wonder, was he being patient for me, or was he just buying himself more time? Was he just performing the role of the supportive husband, while another life was already growing somewhere else? When I finally got pregnant, Julian cried at the ultrasound. Actual tears. I clung to that memory like a lifeline. He painted the nursery himself. We spent months picking out a name, Lily. I didn't know that his assistant, Serena, was already pregnant, too. I didn't know his father had given him an ultimatum. Fix the situation with Serena and her baby before the company's year-end review or he would. That review was scheduled for the week after my due date. Julian wasn't just becoming a father, he was running out of time. The morning I went into labor, he was a wreck, pacing the hospital room. I mistook his anxiety for excitement. He held my hand for 11 hours. He told the nurses how excited he was to be a dad. And maybe a part of him even meant it. He was a great actor. Lily was born at 6:47 a.m. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The sound of my whole world changing. I held her, trembling, and I looked up at Julian waiting. But he didn't move toward us. He backed away. "Do you want to hold her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No," he said, and his voice was just flat, empty. A few minutes later, he stepped into the hall to take a call. The door was ajar, and I heard him say in a low, angry voice, "Not now. Not like this, not over the phone." My blood ran cold. Who was he talking to? It was Serena. She was done being a secret, and a text had just come in from his mother. They were on their way to the hospital. The walls were closing in. He had maybe an hour before his two lives collided right in front of me. He walked back in wearing a different suit, a fresh, tailored suit. He wasn't dressing for his newborn daughter. He was dressing for the execution he was about to perform. He told me everything. About Serena. About their son, born 4 months earlier. About how his parents had already met him. "My family needs a male heir," he said, like he was reading from a corporate memo. Serena gave them one. "I will not acknowledge your daughter as a Vance." I looked at my tiny, sleeping daughter, and something inside me didn't break. It turned to steel. "You're choosing them," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm choosing my family's future," he replied as if we weren't it. That's when I smiled. It completely threw him. "Then remember this moment," I told him softly, "because it's the last one you're going to get from us." He laughed and walked out. By the way, if you're as shocked as I was, hit that subscribe button, because you will not believe what I did next. I didn't run. I stayed in that hospital for 2 more nights. Julian never came back. But my sister, Lena, did. She drove 4 hours through the night and just took over. She held Lily so I could sleep. She argued with the nurses for me. She just sat in a chair in the corner, a silent guardian, and I finally understood what she meant when she told me at my wedding that Julian's kindness felt like a performance. It was on that second night that I finally returned a call from my late Uncle Robert's estate attorney, a woman named Miss Davies. My uncle had died months earlier, and I'd been putting it off. I assumed it was just paperwork. I was wrong. Miss Davies told me my uncle, a quiet structural engineer, had left me his 11% stake in Vance Holdings' development arm. But it wasn't just shares. It was an old voting agreement, still active, still binding. Uncle Robert had never told me why he kept it, but Miss Davies had a hunch. I asked her, from my hospital bed, what it all meant. She took a deep breath and said the words that changed everything. "Clara, it means you have a hell of a lot more power in that company than your husband realizes." I didn't rush. I went home to our house, and I let Julian think I was falling apart. He sent one text. "Have you had time to think things over?" As if I was the one who needed to reconsider anything. I packed a bag, 1 box at a time. Not with anger, but with a quiet, cold clarity. Staying no longer made sense. A week later, I was sitting in Miss Davies' office. The shares Uncle Robert left me gave me the legal right to force a formal review of executive conduct, especially conduct that could risk the company's reputation. And guess what? Vance Holdings was in the middle of a massive refinancing deal. An heir having an affair and 2 competing children with 2 different women? That was exactly the kind of risk the review was designed to catch. We filed the request. 2 weeks later, before the board meeting, Serena called me. She sounded exhausted in a way I now understood. She told me Julian had promised for months that he would leave me. He'd isolated her, telling her just enough to keep her hoping, just enough to keep her quiet. "He does this," she said. "He tells people exactly what they need to hear to keep them moving in his direction." And in that moment, she wasn't the other woman. She was just another victim of his script. The board meeting was held in a glass-walled room on the 14th floor. I walked in with Lily asleep and a carrier on my chest. I wanted him to look at the daughter he abandoned while his entire world came crashing down. His own father, Arthur, asked him in front of everyone, "Is it true you fathered a child with an employee while certifying to our lenders that your personal life was stable?" Julian mumbled something about it being handled privately. "Does privately include abandoning your wife and newborn daughter in a hospital room?" Arthur shot back. For the first time, Julian had no answer. He looked utterly lost. Then came the final blow. A former colleague, Julian, had cheated out of a bonus sent my lawyer a thread of text messages. In them, Julian was joking with his friends that once the heir situation was settled, he planned to cut Serena off, too. It wasn't luck. It was the natural consequence of treating people like they're disposable. Serena stood up, smoothed her blazer, looked directly at Julian and said, "You should have just told the truth. To anybody. Even once." Then she walked out. Julian caught me at the elevator. He looked so small. "You planned this," he said, desperate to make it my fault. "I didn't have to plan anything, Julian," I told him as the doors opened. "I just stopped playing my part, and I walked away with my daughter, and I never looked back." The legal battle was messy, but the outcome was simple. An old clause in the family trust stated that for inheritance priority, an heir had to be born within an intact marriage. He hadn't secured an heir. He had created a succession crisis that ended with Lily, the daughter he refused to hold, being legally recognized as the only child with inheritance standing. The divorce was settled. I didn't ask for revenge. I just asked for what was fair. And fair, with 11% of the company's shares at my back, turned out to be more than he ever imagined. He asked for visitation with Lily. He showed up a few times, late, distracted. By her first birthday, he'd stopped coming at all. Almost a year later, his father, Arthur, asked to meet me for coffee. He told me his own father had raised him the same way, to see people as useful or useless. He said watching Julian walk out of that hospital room was like seeing his own coldness reflected back at him, and he was ashamed. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more like a confession. His mother, Eleanor, sent a letter saying she hoped I would understand these things are complicated. I read it, and I threw it away. Some things just aren't owed. I have a quiet house now, with a big maple tree in the yard. Lily is too, and she's walking and talking and asking where her father is. I don't have the words for that yet. So for now, I just tell her he's far away. Julian called me once, late at night, about a year after it all. His voice was small, broken. He asked if there was still a way for him to be in Lily's life. I thought about that hospital room. "Julian," I said calmly, "you had your 2 hours. I gave you every single day after that to change your mind, and you never did." I hung up. I haven't heard from him since. I think about that moment in the hospital, right before I smiled. That split second where I could have fallen apart, but something inside me, something quieter and stronger than grief, just refused. Every night, I tell Lily that sometimes the people who are supposed to choose you don't. And that isn't the end of a story. It's just the part where you find out who does. Sometimes winning isn't about getting revenge. It's about making sure the next generation never, ever has to beg to be chosen. So I have to ask you, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have broken down and cried? Or would you have found that same cold fire I did? Tell me what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to know.